Is Nicole on?
Yep, I got it turned on. Nicole is unfortunately out, but hold on just a minute. Being at this end of the room for work sessions, I forgot to turn the ceiling mic on. Now they can hear us, yes. Good afternoon, Mayor Beatty and Council, good to be with you. I send my apologies and regret from our Deputy City Recorder, Nicole Madigan, who is out sick this week. The thing that's going around has taken a toll on our staff in the last week, so we hope she's feeling better. But your first report tonight from us is on the annual board and committee recruitment process. And so we'll go ahead and just dive right into it. This is our fourth annual board and committee recruitment process. As was laid out in the staff report, and as most folks know, the city has about 11 standing permanent board and committees. And that totals for between 80 and 90 volunteer positions that we have filled at any one time. In the 2025 cycle, we are looking to fill about 26 positions. We have 6 current vacancies, and a couple of those vacancies are for terms that end in June. So there's a little crossover with the 26 positions whose terms expire in June 30. So I think it's maybe around 29, 30 of the positions we'll need to have council fill now or by June.
We don't know how many people want to re-up yet.
Correct. We are working with our staff liaisons.
Probably be less.
That's right.
Yeah.
Have we given those incumbents a date to tell us?
Yes.
What is that date?
I believe mid-February. We wanted to do February 1st, but given the monthly meeting schedule of most of our boards, we decided to give them some time. So we are actively working. All of our board and committees has a staff liaison, and they're working to find that. We've gotten a lot of answers back, but there are always some volunteers who take a few more reminders to tell us if they are interested in staying or not. So to the mayor's point, there are 26 positions terms expiring in June. Some of those folks will be interested in re-upping, and it has been council's practice that if someone who's already on a board and committee and is otherwise in good standing, they want to be reappointed, then they're renominated for the position. So somewhere between 20 and 30 positions will need to be filled by June. Yeah, so that's where we are.
Sorry, a little bit, maybe off subject, but how many of the boards have term limits? All. Okay.
Yep. They all have term limits. They are either 2 or 3 terms. The planning commission and budget committee are 4-year terms, so those are 2. The rest of them are 2-year terms, so those they can do up to 3 terms consecutively. And the language is such that you do 3 and then you could sit out and you can come back. Should mayor and council want to nominate and reappoint. So the timeline we've outlined in the staff report, and just really quickly, there's a lot of text on this and I don't want to read it all, but generally February 1st to April 1st, February and March, we'll recruit. We are in communication with the strategic engagement team to do social media posts, a citywide postcard like usual, pilot articles, and we're open to doing we've had that goose image the last few years, been pretty popular, pretty catchy. We'll roll that out, get that out around town. So we'll do that in the next 2 months. We will close April 1st, and then we built out the schedule to have a couple of rounds, but those aren't necessarily automatic. It depends on the pool. It depends on the process that we go through with council. Close it April, the first couple of weeks we'll review. We will share all applications with all members of council and take feedback. This is the part of the process that almost no matter how good a plan we have going into it, it always gets a little messy. We'll solicit feedback from council. Historically, most folks who've applied have gotten an interview, but in recent council conversations, it's staff understanding that council may be open to a little more vetting of all the applications. And so if that's the case, and if that's what we get feedback today, then we can change our language to let folks know that when they apply, it's like a job position. Applying doesn't necessarily guarantee an interview. An interview doesn't guarantee being appointed. So we can add a little language to that if that's where the council wants to go with that. But we'll review applications, and then once we have the list of who should be interviewed, we'll go ahead and get those scheduled. With looking to do that first round towards the end of April. And I was looking at that either the 4th or 5th week of April, 20th to the 30th, just because it's generally a freer week for council. So if you're planning, council members, if you're planning, maybe keep that last week of April as open as you can. We will encourage in-person interviews, and that's actually something we tried to do last year. We ended up doing a number of Zoom interviews, and obviously in the 3 or 4 years ago, we did a lot of everything on Zoom because of the pandemic, but
I think we did them all. I would give people just an option if they feel they need it, but I would like it.
there's definitely a lot to be said about seeing people eye to eye at a meeting in a room. Having said that, a lot of folks travel, and having the ability to meet folks where they are and reduce barriers to participation is something we also want to commit to. So with the goal of doing as much as we can in person, but offering Zoom. And then just another tentative date field, the 12th to the 16th, which would be a study session week for council. If we can tentatively keep that week open in the event that a second round is necessary. It may be that through the vetting, the first round vetting, and then the interviewing, the first round, a second round is not necessary. But we wanted to build a schedule out that accounts for giving ourselves plenty of time to talk to folks and make decisions. All this to say, hopefully by the first meeting in June, we've got a slate of appointees for council to consider via consent agenda, and we're good to go. And I wanted to clarify, I put in there language about where council votes on nominees and appointments. There's sort of two steps where there's some form of voting going on. The interview panels, which historically we've had the mayor and then one other member of council, the staff liaison for the board or committee, and then the chair. That's right, liaison chair. So that's usually the 4-person interview panel we've had, and that panel comes to a consensus on who the 2 or 3 people or whatever who's going to get appointed or nominated. And then the mayor's nominating, that informs the mayor's nomination motion to the council, and the council through the consent agenda takes the formal vote to confirm the nominees. It's very similar to like the federal presidential appointment or the governor appointment, and the Senate confirms. So that's sort of the process. So I'm sorry if that can create any confusion about when council votes and how that plays out, but so that's the general premise. It's sort of this similar schedule we've gone through the last 4 years that we've done this annual board and committee. Before this, just for folks who might not have weren't here before 4 years ago, we did interviews ad hoc. And there was nice that we had flexibility in being able to do it whenever we needed it, but that created a lot of interviews over the span of a year, given a whole bunch of fairly random factors in terms of when people leave and all kinds of schedules. So we moved to an annual, which a lot of cities do, and it actually has worked out pretty well. And ideally, we not only get folks appointed in June, we also build alternate lists for folks that we can tap throughout the rest of the year if we have vacancies. It's also over the last couple of years started to align really well with our Leadership Academy. And this month, Nicole and I will be going to Leadership Academy and talking about boards and committees. And it just so happens that a couple of days after that, the application process opens. So we've tried really hard to tie the Leadership Academy and the board and committee and recruitment. Having said that, some of the drawbacks we've seen in recent years is doing it so early in the year. It does work out with our term limits ending, but we have almost no ability to take advantage of the warm months in terms of recruiting folks that get the market in most of our events. So it's not really an event heavy season leading up to the appointment process. That our terms all end in June. And that's just sort of how the schedule lines up at the moment. So having said all that, and having put that out there, does council have any thoughts, feedback about this proposed schedule?
So everybody did some amount of interviews, except you, of course, but the other 3 counselors did some amount of the interviews last time. So I mean, it's not really different than last time, except it's in person, I guess. But raising the question of, should there be screening? So we did have a period where we used this Spark Hire system, and people actually applied on video and answered questions on a video, and then we used that to whittle down and just interview a smaller pool. So there's some precedent for not interviewing everybody. If you have 5 applicants, I say you just interview everybody. But if you have 10 or 12 applicants for, 1 or 2 openings, then that becomes a lot to interview. So I guess, what are people's thoughts about screening applications versus and maybe we wait to see how many we get, right? I mean, maybe we don't have to decide that now, but,
I guess my first thought is that if we have 10 applicants, that's a great problem to have. But I've also not seen that many applicants for 1 or 2 positions. So I think I would rather wait and see what our applicant pool looks like and then determine if we need like a screening step put into it.
that has happened, pretty routinely for the library board. Everybody wants to be on the library board. And they don't have much turnover, although Scott did remind me that we did appoint some of our alternates this year, so I guess they did have some turnover. And there was one year where there were 0 openings and like 10 library board applicants.
It's one
And then we look at them and go, oh, but the tree board needs somebody. They didn't get very many applicants, or, would you be interested in this? Would you be interested in PSAC? So I mean, we don't all, we sometimes manage to use some good candidates who weren't necessarily on the committee they applied for.
Okay.
Yeah.
When we develop an alternate list, are the alternates informed they're on the alternates?
We have generally told them, yep. And the alternate list, it's not something that we've ever asked council to formally adopt. It's just kind of a list that staff keeps. But it has worked out in terms of when we've needed to tap it. By and large, those folks have been ready to step up.
And when we move someone from an alternate to a position, that then goes to council for approval.
Correct.
I think it's fine to vet folks for those highly contested seats. The thing that I would say is I just want to be cautious in how we do that vetting, that we're not screening out unconventional candidates. Or I think those interviews are a great way to get different types of diversity on the boards. So maybe, I don't know how competitive the library board positions are, but first pass is more gentle.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, we may not need to do it, because I do think the interview is valuable for just helping engage people in Milwaukee, talking about, if somebody's not, I have on a few occasions when I thought somebody was particularly talented or energetic or whatever, that they weren't going to get appointed, written them afterwards and encouraged them to, apply again next year or get involved in these other ways in town or whatever. So, I mean, I do think it's useful just for meeting people in the community. It's just for us, and we can be useful for them in terms of information.
So I'm hearing maybe an interest in seeing what the applicant pool looks like and then kind of talking about a vetting process. And I think it's been said that once we have that pool and start building the schedule for interviews, we will plan to do as we have in years past, include all members of council in interviews, and not that you will be on every single interview, but you'll divide and conquer in terms of who's on what panels, who's on what interview panels, what board committee. Good. All right, I think those are the big questions. I do have a couple of follow-up. We talked about structure already. The sub-bullet there, we are in the midst, or actually as of yesterday, of planning commission recruitment just closed. We are at kind of a critical peak moment, as was discussed at previous meetings with Laura Weigel and the planning commission. We're down like planning commissioners, and so we launched it. I'm really happy to report that we, as of today, have 11 applications for the planning commission, which is really fantastic. And we're in the process of starting kind of what we just talked about, the structure, and we hope to get those applications out to council and get that process moving. That's a single commission recruitment. And so like I mentioned, historically, the panel has been the mayor, chair and liaison, and then one other member of council. So one thing that would be really helpful for staff to start scoping and deciding, setting up that panel is if council might right now kind of talk amongst yourself and decide who would like to serve. I'm presuming the mayor would like to be on the planning commission panel.
I would, and I know Counselor Anderson previously expressed an interest, but I'd kind of like to have somebody who was on the planning commission. So I was hoping the council president would serve as the interview person for this.
I'm fine. I've done them a lot, so
Pardon me?
I've done them a lot, so I'm good.
Yeah, yeah. You did quite a few last year, yeah.
Yeah, I did one in Bend too, from Bend actually.
I'm curious if you're open to saying a little bit more, Counselor, about your interest. Like, I think sometimes it's helpful to have a perspective that hasn't already been part of the group because you see things that, that you may not otherwise. But I don't know what your thoughts were around serving in that capacity.
Yeah, I have been thinking with our TSP and neighborhood hubs work and all the other non-reviewing the design standards of the building. Hopefully, as the liaison for those two committees, being what we are. But I understand if you want to hold the building there. If that's something you want to do, Robert, I'll defer to you.
Yeah, I'd like to do it. Oh, I can't remember the reason why I didn't do planning commission last year. Why didn't I? Can't remember.
Well, I mean, yeah, sometimes
I
it's
did.
just vacation schedules or somebody's time.
Ideally, there will be more planning commission interviews with the annual recruitment. Hopefully, folks check that box and we can get folks filled now, but we can get some alternates too. So I'm hearing Mayor Beatty and Council President Massey, this winter recruitment. Great. With that, that's kind of the show. Are there any other thoughts or questions or comments about the annual recruitment, fourth annual board and committee recruitment?
No, I think I will say, I mean, being the one person, I guess, who's done it all 4 years. First as the counselor and then as mayor. I think it's improved every year. And I think, last year went relatively smoothly. We had one committee. I think we had to kind of drum up people and try and get people who applied for other things to consider a committee they hadn't applied for. But it's generally gotten better every year and works pretty smoothly.
Scott, this is a question I totally should have raised when I reviewed your staff report, but I can't remember if you talked at all about youth recruitment and that, and if our plan is to kind of do what we've done in the past in terms of youth recruitment, if there are more youth positions that are vacant, or if those are all filled because of our recruiting efforts last time.
They're not all filled. I believe we have at least 2, maybe 3 youth positions open, and I should have mentioned that in my staff report, and we should definitely call that out individually.
We've
So,
been down a deputy city recorder for over a week. So.
yeah.
Well, and Counselor Stavengard may have some insight on that and their continued interest.
Well, I know I ran into at least one of them, I think it was at Being in the New Year, and they said, when are we getting back together? So there was interest in pulling them all together and kind of talking about how things are going and if they want to continue.
Okay.
I know one person dropped from the arts committee. So there's that position that's open, and, lots of things change. If there's any way that we could be supportive, like connecting with the high school or sending a plea to the high school to do some recruitment or something.
Yep.
Yeah, let me know.
Our outstanding students weren't so prescribed. I would like them all.
Yeah.
Well, and they tend to be seniors, whereas we'd like to get people a little earlier in their high school.
There's a college and career class that all the first year students have to take. So it might be, maybe a visit to that class, and get people thinking about things that they want to put on their resume or a career path that aligns.
Yeah, we've reached out to the high school before, and we've often landed with administrators, which I think might have different perspectives than in-room teachers. But we'll definitely give it a good pitch for the youth and recruitment and reach out to the high school.
Yeah, and if there, I mean, Counselor Stebbins, I mean, if there is a class or an assembly or whatever where, you know, they give us 5 minutes to make a pitch, I'd go with Counselor Stebbins or to make a pitch.
Throw t-shirts into the.
Yeah, one of those t-shirt guns.
I think that's actually been advocated for internally. I don't know how.
I'm actually surprised we don't already have a t-shirt.
It has been,
Ideas.
Rebecca, I thought you did a good job bringing in so many,
yeah.
6 months ago or so. Do we have any feel for, are they all sort of actively engaged?
I don't know what the attendance looks like for the, let's see, well, the liaison to the MERCAC hasn't met with the committee yet. The Arts Committee, I know that youth have been attending, some more regularly than others. And let's see, who else did we have? Let's see, we have the tree.
Yeah, we do.
Parks
I gotta
Board?
tell you, the rep on Parks is dynamite.
Yeah.
I mean, she's correcting the minutes from the last meeting.
That's great.
Yeah, that's a really driven young woman.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the overall attendance has looked like, but I think that what we did in the first quarter and kind of like bringing them all together so that they get a chance to hear from each other, I think that really helped a lot in bringing that group kind of closer.
Yeah, and
And I know it's,
the last month, all
Yeah.
we need to revisit it.
Well, and if you do that again, maybe we can, I mean, if they're, for those who are willing, maybe we can get some little video snippets from them about what they like about certain people or, you know.
a recruitment video, is that what you're thinking?
That is what I'm thinking.
We'll put it on TikTok. Oh, wait.
I know that young people are engaging in other volunteer ways with the city. I think, you know, that if we're creative and thinking about how we have that connection, it's served us well. But it is, it's time intensive.
Yeah, so youth for sure. Any other thoughts? If not, then I will get out of the way so our chief can, give his report.
Way to be on time, Scott.
Yes, see, that was good.
You caught us up.
Well, you're-
Chief Burdick, please,
Good evening, everybody.
talk to us about stops data.
T-shirt cannon sounds amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
If we have a flyer wrapped in the t-shirt, then it could be educational.
Yes. We don't have a policy yet, so get it in now.
started here.
I just want to give the chief props. He also was out sick this last week, so, and still wrote a great staff report and is here to present, so.
Might have been affected by,
Masks in City Hall today, and I guess now I know why.
everyone's getting creamed with it.
Yeah.
My wife is looking at me with a little bit of anger. I know.
You brought this to the house.
So, in addition to the staff report, I did a PowerPoint presentation. So this is the 2024 stops report. Again, kind of a reminder, the stops report is the Oregon House Bill 2355 from 2017. That is requiring law enforcement to document the demographics of all the self-initiated traffic stops and pedestrian stops that we make. This test, there's largely 3 tests. The first test is formerly called the Veil of Darkness test, but now called the Decision to Stop test. And essentially saying that you should have a 1-to-1 ratio between groups with daytime and nighttime. So you should have an equal number of Latinx drivers contacted in the daytime as the evening hours. Stop 2 is the predicted disposition. Your citations issued, searches or arrests made among your different racial groups. And test 3 are the search finding analysis, the rates of successful searches across different racial groups. The results we got back this year are the decision to stop rate indicated a failure for Black drivers of 2.17. Test 2 and test 3, we passed with meeting the standard that they applied. Once we got that information, we wanted to look at that to understand it better. The CJC is a great group. Angel Perrin, Kelly Officer are 2 gals that we've had a lot of contact with, especially since getting this test result, to say what's going on with our data, what are we doing, what can we learn from it, and to dive into how are we getting these results and why. So we did that. Hopefully I can work this correctly. So again, these are the 3 tests. That first one is the veil of darkness or decision to stop. And then the second one, predicted disposition, citations issued, searches or arrests made. And test 3, the rate of successful searches across different groups. So there's a couple slides I included in here to try and give some background or some framework for this. For the veil of darkness or that decision to stop, they do need a minimum of 100 observations to be able to have enough of a sample size. Our sample size for Black drivers for this rating period was approximately 188. The overall amount of stops during this veil of darkness test was I pulled data for all the demographics to show if we're making approximately a little over almost 10,000 stops, this is how it breaks down by race. This is how it breaks down with census data. So looks like the 3 groups, white drivers we stopped at about a little over 3% higher than the census would say. Black drivers, a little over 1.5%. Asian drivers was significantly under, at about 5%. Hispanic drivers, we stopped at about 0.5% higher. And then Middle Eastern, Native American, Pacific Islanders were all fairly comparable. Now, bear with me on this. I put this up just to say I'm not a statistician. They use a logistical regression with a Bonferroni calculation.
With a what?
A Bonferroni calculation.
Okay.
And I've got a lot of limitations, and Bonferroni's one of them. So,
I think you can pronounce it.
yeah. But what I will say is and how this is explained to me, and I'll get to more detail coming up, is they're doing a sample out of what's called an inner twilight period. So they're not looking at 24 hours. They're looking at roughly 2 time frames in the morning, and then this transition time frame from about 5 to 9 p.m. And that's what they pull their sample size out of. And that's more important as I get to some later slides and our data and our results.
So,
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is that,
Year round? Because 5 p.m. is already dark some parts of the year and not at all.
So there is shifting within the calendar year as it pertains to darkness. It's like in, July. July, 7:30 p.m. it's sunlight. Okay, so that's going to be factored in. And they do have an adjusting within those 2 inner twilight periods, I'm told, as part of this calculation. And this isn't to pull data from, but the red band is an example of a flagged inter-twilight period, just to kind of highlight that. That's why I included that slide. But the more information or informative slides will come. So on the far left with the green arrow, the sample size for Black drivers in the inter-twilight window was 188. The timeframe is roughly July 1, 2022 to June 30, 2024, resulting in that 2.17. And I was told that about 1.8 is where that would cut off. Above 1.8 would indicate a fail for that point, that data point.
Just to note, because this was a question I asked Chief, this is a complicated data set. We've talked about the complicated algorithm. It's also complicated where they pull the data from. So you might see in the staff report some tables where it reports a 2024, the year. That's the year the data was reported. But as Chief is showing you, that actually, that 2024 report pulls data from a 2-year period, which is 2022 to 2024.
Correct. Yeah.
It is complicated.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, what was the reasoning for the stops? I mean, it wasn't because they were black drivers, right? I'm assuming.
So correct. So the reasoning can be everything from we're issuing a traffic citation to just a consent contact for some other reason. This is pedestrian and traffic.
Pedestrian and traffic.
So obviously, when we got that result, because the prior 2 years were very close to 1, what do we learn from this? What do we need to learn? What do we need to do better? How do we understand this and absorb the data? The total stops was roughly 728 black drivers for that 2-year period, with 188 pulled out of that inner twilight period for black drivers. So one of the things we could do was we asked for all the raw data and put it to essentially a 24-hour clock to say, how are we getting these stops? How many are occurring per hour? Is there a deployment, a staffing, some other issue that's affecting our data, or just what can we learn? And the 2 orange blocks represent that inner twilight period that the CJC is pulling data from. So they're not necessarily pulling data from the other hours of the day, all right? And what I highlighted in yellow are when we do briefing. So when we do briefing at the PD, we do 2 now. In last November, we just switched to 12-hour shifts, so we do a 6 p.m. briefing now. But the prior, I don't know how many, 10, 15 years, we run a 4-10 schedule where we do roll call training and briefing 3 times a day. And that usually is about an hour. So what'll happen is the incoming shift will get a call log for the last 24 hours. They'll talk it over, and then we may talk about some other item of note, officer safety issue, or we may also do what's called roll call training, where we'll do a small 15 to 30 minute, update on some case law, refresher on handcuffing, whatever that training thing is. And one of the things that was apparent to us was when where traffic stops absolutely plummet because most of the officers are off the road. And one of the questions I posed to CJC was, if this inner twilight window, especially the 5 to essentially 9 p.m., if they're looking at stops during when it's light out versus dark out, if that last hour, we're not making many stops or very few, can that affect our data? And she said the answer is yes. You can have your data affected. So one of the things we did with this was we also split it up into, hopefully this makes sense too, is if we looked at this and we broke it down from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., how many stops are we doing in a very straightforward, simple day to night? And we did that from 7 to 7, 6 to 6. And in all 3 instances, we're doing more stops of black drivers at night than we are during the daytime. And this next slide also speaks to that. So when we were talking with CJC, because we were saying, hey, we're trying to learn from this, we want to own the data, but we're not getting this for any other demographic except for Black drivers. What could possibly account for that? Could it be scheduling? And there is a yes to that. And the other issue that came up was the small sample size. That if you do have a small sample size, you're more prone to swings in your data than you otherwise might be. So we definitely are looking at this still. The CJC has been really good to talk with, to work with. They're always available too, if this is something the council has interest in, and we can facilitate that. If there's more detailed questions that, especially how the calculations are done with that Bonferroni and things like that, I'll struggle to answer those. But this also was something that we take very seriously. We want to make sure that we get it right. We know everyone has inherent biases, and we want to make sure that we're a professional organization doing the right thing, and that as we get data, we're open-minded about it, we learn from it, and we're trying to make sure we make the right steps as an organization. So that's kind of the quick version of the
So
PowerPoint.
I can't imagine we're the only police department that's having those briefings
Correct.
bump up against that. So is there not a way they could shift the 4-hour comparison periods or whatever
I don't know
outside of when the briefings?
if it's possible to tailor it specifically to our agency size. One of the things I'm really curious about is in November, we switched to 12-hour shifts just due to low staffing. And so we run 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And will that affect our data? How it will affect our data going forward? So, but yeah, there's additional questions I have too.
Other questions?
This is an ancillary question, but what was the force's response to shift to 12 hours?
So far, positive. So one of the things we did was we got with our union ahead of time and said, hey, we've got a lot of work. How do we do that together? And shaping how we do that work is important to me. And there's different factors that come up. There's different schedules that you can work. This was the one that they selected, and so far it's been good. They've been very adaptable. We have been working them very hard for several years now. I've had a couple employees between the 400 to 500 hours of overtime range.
Wow.
Not everybody, but there's several. So they're busy.
That's 10 hours a week. Wow.
You
Yes.
will see in the next budget committee update, quarterly report, and major credit to Chief and the whole leadership team at the PD for this, but this schedule change has a marked reduction in overtime required, which is good for our bottom line, and it's frankly good for not burning out our staff.
I mean, the advantage is that, people get a good chunk of recharge time, but those 4 days are tough.
It's some long days, and we're mindful of that. It's just kind of sometimes what's the best bad option.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
I have a question that's more about like environmental factors within our community.
Okay.
And so that's not necessarily about what's happening within Milwaukie PD, but like what you're finding with the global conversation about this at the CJC level. So I'm wondering if there are some factors about communities that would result in having more Black drivers out at night and therefore being stopped more frequently.
sure. So I've got a good close friend, he's a state police sergeant, and he works outside Milton Freewater. And he does a lot of traffic enforcement, a lot of DUI enforcement. It's disproportionate with the Latinx population, or migrant population for that area. And it's a tough balance in managing, making sure that they're looking to make sure that they're not making bias-based stops, but also being cognitive of this is the community, that you work with it. And balancing that in a way to be as professional as you can, but also just be aware too, always. And that's one of the things that came in when this data came in, was we were just like, we have to figure this out. And this data, there's not, when we get the spreadsheet, there's not officer names with this. This is generic. But we were like, okay, are we, do we have a specific time frame that we're disproportionately stopping Black drivers, or what could account for this? And so it took a while, and I'm still open. There still could be other information that we're not seeing, but this is something we thought was valuable and something that we're learning along the way.
I'm thinking about things like childcare pickups that might happen at the beginning of that stop timeframe. And then, retail jobs or,
100%.
and I'm surprised, like, if you go back to the slide that has the breakdown by hour, when your shift change, or maybe it's not a shift change, but when you're done with the briefing, I thought I saw it jumped to 64. Yeah, at 9 p.m., it jumps to 64 stops per hour. So I guess, it brings up a lot of questions for me about the proportionality of, who's on the road at certain times, and then if that's reflected in our stop data.
So that's a good question. And one of the reasons that spikes is, so at the conclusion of that 9 o'clock hour, graveyard is just starting their shift. And then swing shift still works till midnight. So we have that shift overlap, and we have generally our brand new low seniority officers are working night shift. They're very energetic. And so they're out there making a lot of traffic stops. But another point to what you're talking about too is, there's a lot of people, this is probably the poor term, but that are working shift work that's lower wage jobs. They're not our commuters, the 8 to 5 traditional. They're falling outside in those different timeframes. And then being aware of that as we track our data, how we're doing traffic, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Thanks for being so thoughtful about the way that you're interpreting the data too.
Thank you.
How many, since the last time we saw the stops data, how many new officers have we had? Quite a bit.
Quite a bit. We have so much, we've had way more turnover in the last few years. I would say the whole industry, since the start of COVID, there's been a marked, with not just our agency, but in law enforcement in general. I'd say teachers, nurses, that first responder category a little bit, a lot of turnover.
I'm curious, and the reason I ask is because I'm curious, and again, nothing against the new officers, but I'm sure coming into a new department, being a new officer, you probably do carry some biases if you haven't had certain training that our department does, because our department does some exemplary stuff. So I'm wondering if that has to do with the uptick too, if they're just the new officers still carrying some of the, again, nothing against, we all carry that. But if, as a new young officer, if that.
It could. The one slide too that I think should be incorporated in stops is if you're making an X amount of stops total, you should be looking at the demographics in total and comparing that to your community or your area. And you should be, those should have some alignment, and if you don't have alignment, you should be looking at why. The training is really important. That's one of the things we're struggling with is because we're low staffed. All the training we want to do, the extra training, we're struggling to get because we have to have people on patrol 24/7, and it's a balance.
I want to commend Chief, and Gabriella's here as well. Gabriella and Ryan have spent a lot of time together. really since Gabriella started, but especially since this data has come in, I've really appreciated the partnership between the two of you as you comb through this and talk about the steps we are going to take. Because again, I think I really appreciate the chief bringing up the methodological concerns. But all that said, I mean, we take this very seriously. Anytime we see something that could be an indicator of a problem, we spoke to you about our values a few weeks ago, and we are committed to those. So we're committed to taking the action. And the chief is right that it's right now when we're spread so thin, it's hard to do the robust training, anti-bias training that I think we would like to, and we're going to figure out a way to do it.
Gabriella has been great. So,
On page 76 of our work session packet, you have this decision to stop analysis for a whole bunch of comparator cities. And Milwaukee is the only one with a statistically significant DST number.
Which page is that, Will, again?
That's 43 of the stops packet, but work session 74. Or page 76, depends on how you want to
you
take
might
it.
have to peek at your computer
Or
screen.
you swipe on your tablets and get to there wherever you need.
I'll bring it over to you, chief.
Okay.
I'm curious, yeah, I can bring it here. Like, have you had conversations? It is by far the largest number of any of these comparator cities.
In terms, for the test failure
For the-
for decision to stop, it is a high number with a low sample size. We were the only agency, I believe, that got flagged for black drivers. I think of the 5 that were flagged, the other 4 were for Latinx. And there can be issues. There was one city that there's apparently some, I didn't fully understand, but there was a data issue with how they submit that triggered the flag.
Yeah.
That number of 2.17 being higher than the others, I think you have to really know that calculation. But the other part I would say too, when talking with Kelly Officer, who works with the CJC, you are prone to bigger swings with small sample sizes. So,
I do still, I mean, it has a p-value of 0.05, which in common statistical terms is like a statistically significant sample size. And so there is some, at least statistical basis for evidence of discrimination in our stops. And I guess I'm just curious, I understand that we're understaffed and that it's hard to roll out these trainings, and that our staff has changed so much since
Sure.
it was in place, but is there a change that came after this? Like an inflection point that we want to see, or how has our equity work, I guess, changed in light of these numbers?
so the equity work is always ongoing. And I think that's part of the follow-up with Gabriella is to look at this, look at the results, and look at our business practices and make sure we're doing the things we should be doing. Making sure too, also that, hey, even the CJC is saying one data point, also do not let that necessarily drive you purely in a direction. You can have data that skews favorably or unfavorably, potentially. And so look at it in its totality, learn from it. And I think that's what we're trying to do. I think I learned a lot when I started looking, okay, especially that over a 24-hour period. And the p-value, I don't know that.
I also want to clarify, Councilor, that's a great question. So it's not like the chief has sat on this data for very long, we have at the end of the year. And one thing I really appreciate, Ryan does this presentation every year. We want to be as transparent as possible when the data comes in from CJC. So I think it's honest to say that, there's some processing we're still doing. We're trying to understand it better. We're trying to compare it to our call logs and understand sort of, is there a pattern? Who's writing these, what are we learning? And then working with Gabriella on that, okay, we know we're short-staffed. We know we don't have the luxury of being able to send every new recruit off to a 5-day bias training. What can we do? And I think we're all committed to doing that work. I think in the staff report, we talk about several of the steps that the PD has taken to live out that commitment to reducing bias in policing. But there's we're open to also suggestions or ideas if you have feedback of things we can do. And that's why Chief wanted to bring this right away when we could.
There's a fantastic group that we've done, I think I think we've done twice with, was it FIP, the Fair and Impartial Policing? They're a great group. The training is top shelf. It's expensive and it takes a lot to get everyone together. But it's something I think we want to do. It's just something we can't do every year. But I think that's a good follow-up to always be doing that maintenance. And then just be open with and transparent with your data. And I think data is important and talk about it, always answer to it.
Chief, have you shared these results with your staff?
I have not yet,
Okay.
but I will.
So I think that's another step we can, is noting the trends that we see, explaining that this isn't an outcome we want to see repeated. So it's on all of us to address where where this is coming from. Acknowledging all the methodological constraints we've got. But like I said, we take it really seriously and we own the data. And we'll work to address it.
One point about the methodological history of this, I think it's important to make a note for future generations of leadership in Milwaukee that the shift change happened this year. Because I think back to the way that the census gathered race and ethnicity data, and when that change was made, then you couldn't make comparisons between that first year and the previous year. And so I think it's really super important to be able to document that environmental change for the department so that it's not, so that these two, like the next set of stops data isn't compared in the same way to this one.
Agreed.
I think we can also follow up with CJC. As the chief said, we've got a great relationship with them, but to sort of say, to your point, Councilor Anderson, we see we're an outlier in this column. We don't want to see that in future years. What recommendations do you have to us? I mean, this is a state mandated program, the stops reporting, to enable this data transparency. And I think there's a lot we can learn from them and what they've seen be effective in other communities.
Yeah.
And I guess I would just throw out there that later tonight, we're going to discuss our legislative agenda. But that will be the legislative session is off and running, and there will be some asks around training funding. It's not going to address the short staffing issue, but if there's something you should be watching for or supporting in terms of funding of training from the state, do let us know. I know the Metro Mayor's Consortium legislative agenda does call out the enhanced training capacity to get people through the training, the basic training faster, and keeping that up. And maybe even I've heard talk of opening a second academy in the metro area or something. I guess this is not so much a basic academy question, this is other kinds of training, but if there's anything we should be watching for or trying to advocate for in terms of what happens in the state legislature this term, to let us know.
Okay. That's pretty much all I had. Again, the CJC folks, they're great. If they're happy to come in, if there's a more deeper dive into how the data is collected, they can speak to that certainly better than I can.
I think they did come the first year or two of this, and I guess if you would like us to invite them.
I think what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, councilors, but actually is less interest in, I think the chief did a good job, give yourself credit, Mr. Accountant, of explaining the numerical side behind this and some of the limitations. But I think some of the questions are more about what do we do? What do we do based on this data? What are the steps we're going to take? So it doesn't sound like there's going to be a clamoring for CJC to come talk to us about the numbers, but maybe a follow-up. And I think we've got our next equity update in March. We could talk a little bit through that about some of the steps we're taking at the PD as we continue to foster the culture that we're trying to build.
And Gabrielle and I can put our heads together and maybe throw out some things coming up. The FIP is something I want to do. I think that would be a great first step.
Is that the training we did in conjunction with the community?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's the other beneficial part is making sure we have contact. And one of the things we stress is to the officers is say, we like self-initiated contact, but that doesn't have to be a traffic stop. You can actually just say hi to somebody and strike a conversation up. And we want that, that's the self-initiated contact, go see a business owner, go talk to somebody. And if we know each other better, it breaks down a lot of barriers. And it's just a better community for it.
I saw the CSG presentation. last year.
I don't think it was, I think it's been a couple of
I've
years.
seen it. I don't know. I've seen it somewhere. But have you seen it? 2 years ago. Have you guys seen it? Yeah. At some point, I think if you have a group of people who haven't seen it, it's a good idea to bring it back in, because I think I think you can.
Sorry, go for it. Ms. Anderson.
I was just gonna say, I think I genuinely am really proud of the work that our PD has done leaning into equity. And it's interesting to me, when you see a data point that suggests for some level of racial bias, how do you respond when you think you're already doing the work? And I think that maybe it's not maybe there's no other thing that we could do. It's just that extra urgency for reinvesting in the work, prioritizing this busy or stressed out. But I don't mean to imply that you're not working on this, but I do think that these numbers are something that we should take to heart and think about.
Absolutely. Yep.
Sounds like you could use a fully staffed police department too.
That would be
Because that
true.
might be part of the issue. Not having that, I know that's a separate issue, but I think not having that is a huge detriment to continuing that continued education, if you want to call it that. And then also not overstressing your officers to where those biases creep back in, or it's late, they're tired, they've been on duty the whole time. I mean, all that factors in, and
That compassion fatigue starts to
yeah,
go down.
yeah. So I mean, I'm sure with a fully staffed department, those numbers would probably be a lot better.
Okay, well, we'll bring back some updates as part of that March equity update, and then we'll get going on the FIP training, and also share with you guys when that is scheduled. And as more questions come to mind, please let me know. That's one of you.
All right, thank you, Chief.
Have a good night.
You got us ahead of schedule. Never happens. So, line up our finance director and his team to talk about the audit.
Go to the restroom.
Yeah, of course. We'll have you both sit down there. Scott will change the name. You can break just pop the black things off. There you go.
It's like a pancake.
Scott will eventually put your names in front of you.
You don't have to
You don't
pretend
have
to
to
be the
wait.
police chief.
We know you're not the police chief.
Do we need to sanitize this after Ryan was out last?
I think hopefully it's contagion is fast.
That's just Why didn't, I don't think I gave the PowerPoint. I did. How amazing.
Yep,
Great.
we're ahead of it. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to briefly introduce Ashley Austin. She's with Moss Adams. A year ago, we were struggling to get through our audit on time. the last 2 years, we had gone into March. Last year, I assumed this role, and you all gave me a bit of grace in going out and doing a new RFP for a new audit firm. And we did that in partnership with the audit committee and came up with Moss Adams. I had worked with Ashley for 10 to 15 years before that and always had a great working relationship. This year, we also added Matt Deeds as Assistant Finance Director, who was tremendous. So this year, it went like clockwork. In November, they came out. We had all our schedules and everything ready and prepared. They did their field work in November, December, and we issued in advance of the 12/31 deadline. All the kudos go to Matt and Judy, who did all this work. I was out a couple weeks during that time on some personal things, and I think it just shows that with me being out, they were able to continue the work and issue a clean opinion. So with that, here's Ashley to present kind of a background on what they do and the results.
Thanks, Michael. And good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me this evening. This presentation is going to go through key service team members that were on your engagement, the questions and answers that we think you would want to know as city council about the audit process, and then a summary high-level slide on our required communications with those charged with governance, which we had with the audit committee last week. So weeks ago, I don't know. This is your service team, high level. I served as your engagement reviewer. That means that you will see my personal signature on your audit opinion in accordance with Oregon minimum standards. Amanda McCleary Moore is a partner in our Medford location. She served as a concurring review partner. That means that she doesn't have any connection to the client, you. She can challenge decisions I make in our audit file about materiality, about risk areas, about things like that. She also does a technical review of the financial statements and the opinions. She also heads she's our regional industry group leader for the Pacific Northwest region for government services specifically. She's been in practice for many years. And then Kelly Jones is a senior manager. She's been with Moss Adams for about 10 to 12 years now, and she helped do some delegated engagement reviews, supervision of the team. She was on site for a few days throughout fieldwork, but she is actually based out of Eugene, Oregon. So the first question is, what does an audit of the city entail? So that independent verification of transactions and account balances. So we're going to look at your source documents. We're going to look at invoices. We're going to verify balances with third parties. We're going to send confirmations to those third parties. We're going to perform an analytical review and ask questions if things don't make sense based on expectations that we independently set, and then perform substantive testing procedures, which means that's the show me portion of the audit. That's looking at those invoices, looking at bank statements, et cetera. We also evaluate the effectiveness of internal controls. We review key controls, things that if they were to lapse, there could be an error that would flow through the financial statements or fraud. There were neither of those that were identified this year. However, we do look at those key controls. We test for operational effectiveness where we think controls are operating effectively, and then we report out any control weaknesses that we identify. We also test compliance with state law. So Oregon minimum audit standards requires testing of a variety of different compliance requirements, budget adoption, procurement. Those are the types of things that we test in more detail. And then finally, we perform a technical review of the financial statements, meaning that what's included in the financial statements prepared by management actually agrees to what we audited, that the financial statements meet all those technical requirements, bells and whistles, GAAP, state, legal, and GFOA requirements, and then that the supplementary information that you present is also presented accurately. And finally, we report the audit results. So we meet with management throughout the audit process, have contact with finance staff. We had an exit meeting with the audit committee, as I mentioned, and then I'm here with you tonight to talk, to report to the city council. So question number 2, are the financial statements accurate? Michael already let that one fly, but we did issue an unmodified opinion, meaning you received a clean opinion, highest level of assurance that you can receive. meaning your financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with US generally accepted accounting principles. Our audit procedures are listed on this slide, but I also talked about them in the previous slide. We perform that risk assessment to make sure that we're addressing the high-level risks at the city based on conversations that we've had with management, also our understanding of the government industry in Oregon, look at internal controls, perform substantive testing, et cetera. Did the city comply with applicable state laws and regulations? So I mentioned Oregon minimum standards. Of course, we have to perform a risk assessment related to Oregon minimum standards and the specific compliance requirements that are direct and material to the city. We perform compliance testing over the budget, adoption, and public contracting, as well as a few other minor items as well. And happy to report that there were no control findings identified. We did have one compliance finding identified because anytime the city is over budget, over expenditures are identified, then those have to be reported in the notes to the financial statements as well as in our opinion as well. And there was one over expenditure in the general fund IT department budget for about $45,000. So did the audit identify any fraud, waste, or abuse? So again, our audit procedures are we evaluate those key controls, we look at significant estimates that management makes, we do a brainstorming session both with the engagement team independent of management to talk about risk areas that we think are significant, that could have fraud. And then we interview individuals throughout the city. We interview management, we interviewed Emma, we interviewed other people outside of the accounting process just to ask direct questions. Do you know about any fraud? Are you concerned about any items that we should be looking into as auditors? And the testing uncovered no reportable matters of fraud, waste, or abuse during the audit. So our high-level communications with those charged with governance is that we had in-depth discussions, went through, way more slides than what I'm going to show you here today, documenting and communicating all of our required communications. Back in last week, as I mentioned, a few high-level things that you might want to know as City Council is audit adjustments. There were no corrected audit adjustments. We had 3 minor proposed audit adjustments that were identified. Nothing was significant. Management can pass on those, and they did. And so we included them in the rep letter, but they did not adjust their trial balance for those items. No difficulties encountered in the audit process. That would be difficulties obtaining audit documentation or obtaining access to individuals throughout the audit process. No disagreements with management about an audit or accounting matter, and no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses were identified. A few best practice recommendations that were communicated verbally throughout the audit process. And we like to thank, the City Council, the Audit Committee, Emma, Michael, Matt, and all of the finance team for, helping to facilitate a first-year audit is no small undertaking, and to come through an issue in December before the deadline and have it go as smoothly as it did was just really big amount of gratitude to both the city and Emma and your leadership. So I'll open it up for questions.
Questions?
What was the 45,000?
Oh,
In
that's,
the IT.
Yeah, where did that come from?
So there's been new accounting guidelines that have come in. And for subscription-based models, you have to do the full subscription amount in the current year. And correct me if I'm saying anything that's wrong. But as we did that, we didn't budget for the whole 5-year process of the subscription that we included. So that's something in the next steps as we budget, we need to increase our budget process for that. It wasn't that we necessarily went over budget on something, it's just how the accounting of it is accounted for now. It's something that Joe and I had talked about going forward, but at this time, because there was a change in accounting principles, we did go over budget.
and that tends to be what happens when if you're usually under budget and you're over budget randomly, it's due to generally a technical accounting item that just isn't on management's radar and or a random accrual that comes through after the end of the year that should have been accrued for, and something like that generally happens.
So
So,
no siphoning of our IT funds, Michael?
No.
To a personal offshore account?
Not in IT.
It's like if you had to, in your household budget, account for your full year of Netflix payments
Yeah,
in
yeah.
January
No, I-
instead of
That
once.
makes, that makes sense.
Exactly.
Thank you, I appreciate the explanation.
Can you walk us, I can't remember what you called them on the last slide, audit adjustments?
audit adjustment.
Can you walk us through like what one of those would have been?
Yeah, I didn't look at the three individually before I came, but one of them was related to invoices that were identified after year end by management. They have a cutoff date, so I think they don't accrue invoices past August 15th, or maybe it's earlier, but let's just say it's August 15th. And I think a couple of bigger invoices came through, like City of Portland invoice that was related to 2024, services that were performed and provided in June of 2024 for like $75,000 to $125,000. And management has a policy that says, well, if an invoice comes in after that date, we don't book it. But it was larger than our findings threshold. So during our audit planning process, we set a materiality that's an overarching number. And then we set a materiality based on fund. And then a percentage of that, a very small percentage of that materiality is our findings threshold. And so it was above our findings threshold, which meant it needed to be communicated to management. So not material to the fund overall. There was also a property tax revenue reconciliation item that was identified as incorrect that should have been recorded in 2023 instead of 2024. So there was an adjustment for that. There was a third one.
Oh, I didn't expect you to remember them all.
Oh, I should have looked at it, I'm sorry.
Those were the two I had.
They're usually about when something was booked.
Yeah, accrual, yeah.
So I don't have a question. I was in the audit committee meeting, so we got all of our questions answered last time. But I just want to make one sort of observation is that I really appreciate, the bench that Moss Adams brings to the process here. I feel a lot more comfortable with, sort of the resource, depth that they have. I'm not sure you might have picked it up, but when Ashley was talking about Amanda in Medford, that's pretty important because, we have our financial team and we have Moss Adams, who's our auditor. And actually, Moss Adams has their own auditor in Amanda. And she does a completely independent review of what that team has done. And so that gives you, a backstop and that kind of thing, which I think is important because some of you are probably too young to remember the Enron debacle. And they were very close to their accounting firm. And basically, they had a big five accounting firm embedded in their organization that became completely corrupted by, the Enron practices. And that kind of thing. I don't know if those kinds of things influence you.
Well, some of the things that are actually required by us today is influenced by Enron. Things like SAS 99 interviews, those interviews that we have with management that force us to ask, do you know about any fraud? That is part of what happened out of Enron. It might have been that the concurring reviewer also came out of Enron. I'm not sure.
But it just gives you a level of confidence that it's, you're not, it's not a single point of failure in the audit process.
There's a lot of checks and balances.
So I wrote down some questions and I was stupid and did not write the page number they came from. But somewhere you talk about, in like general assessment, you talk about $89 million in liabilities and call 75 million long-term liabilities and 15 million other. And I guess I'm assuming the long-term liabilities are like our bonds.
Bonds, compensated absences, lease liability, subscription-based information technology arrangement, I think. Matt, do you want to jump in? I can't remember off the top of my head.
All long-term debt that
Yeah.
the city is obligated for in the future.
And so what's other? I mean, what's the trigger to be long-term? What's constitutes
Anything
long-
over 12 months that's
Over
due.
12 months,
Mhm,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, so other is things that are paid off in less than 12 months.
Within the year.
I need to see your financial statements, but yeah, if it's current, then yes, it's anything that's due within the next 12 months from,
Oh, actually, I
June
can
30,
tell you, it's
2024.
WS 108, it's financial highlights, the city's liability, yeah, anyway. Okay, I was just trying to understand those terms.
yeah,
And there was another set of terms, deferred outflows and deferred inflows.
so that's related to your pension and your OPEB, and it was created through an accounting standard GASB 68. And deferred inflows and outflows are derived from the pension liability, which is very complex, and adjustments that move the valuation of the investments that are held on the city's behalf, on behalf of all of the participants in that plan. When they go up or down, that could cause an increase or decrease in your deferred outflows. Deferred inflows are things that you're going to, deferred inflows could be, you know, amounts that you've paid after the measurement date of June 30, 2023, contributions that you made after that date, those things get booked in deferred inflows and outflows. It's really just a technical accounting term to house things that are recognized as revenue and expenses later on.
Stuff that's kind of out of the city's hands,
Yeah.
but we have a third party that sends us all the valuations and
Oregon
actuaries.
PERS.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, I was looking specifically to look at PERS, at the PERS chart, and PERS liability, because I know that has been such a hot button over the last decade or something.
Oh, yeah, ever since GASB 68 came out, I think that was 10 years ago now.
Yeah. So we feel pretty comfortable that we have that in scope or in,
Well, I can say from an auditor perspective, yes, because we tied out all those amounts to the information that is audited at Oregon PERS. They enlist a separate auditor to audit the allocation of the liability to all the various participants in the plan, including the city of Milwaukie, including all the Oregon governments that are in that plan. So they audit that allocation and then they distribute the reports, and essentially the city books
disclosure.
the liabilities, deferred inflows and outflows based on those reports that are received. And so we consider the use of a specialist in that piece of the audit, where the specialist is the actuary that Oregon PERS uses, which is Milliman. And Milliman performs all of the actuarial work related to Oregon PERS and contribution and the pension liability.
And we can look into this more detail in our financial stability next update for you all, but we know the PERS shoe is out there waiting to drop, and I think if I'm channeling our conversations with Bonnie as we were putting this latest budget together, I mean, we've been very conservative in our budgeting for that, knowing that that is out there. So I think we're in good stead, but it's something we continue
From
to
all the information that we know.
we have available to us, yeah.
Okay, great. Any other questions, anyone?
I just want to, again, give so much kudos. When Michael and I struggled through the first 3 months of 2023 as, sort of interim finance directors, we both kind of made a commitment to each other, like, we're going to get this next audit done on time. And as he mentioned, under his leadership, it was incredible. And it was so incredible with Matt at the helm too, that when Mike had to be out for a bit, we didn't miss a beat. So just thank you so much. Thank you, Ashley. It's been a pleasure working with you. This could not have gone smoother from my perspective. So I really appreciate it.
For the record too, I also wanted to give kudos to Judy Serio, who did a lot of this work with the work papers as well, and the whole finance team. In the first years of audit, it can be hard, but I think that we kind of just solidified, our work papers and the work that we do. And I think next year, it's just going to be a good partnership.
Great.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
All right. Wow,
Save you some time.
we're adjourned with the.
You want to do council report stuff? We won't start the regular session until 6:30.
I don't want to do, I think that's gonna probably take longer, but other council reports people have?
Oh, yeah,
They have
yeah,
council
I do.
reports they want to
I
get?
was trying to think of what, had a West meeting and I've had a CAB meeting. And the CAB meeting was just going over a little bit more in depth of, you know, our bylaws and what we should be doing, budget, and recruitment too. We're trying to find ways for recruitment. We've created a stipend, which we did last year, but it's hopefully going to be approved in the next couple months, at least for people with low income or people who are coming to those CAB meetings for financially constrained, you know, get something for giving their time. We're also thinking of moving the meeting times, because right now our meetings are 7:30 in the morning, 9. So that's probably a barrier for a lot of folks, especially if you got kids going to school or you have a job.
You're meeting in person?
No, we're still doing, we're doing both. We're doing hybrid and in person. We're doing hybrid. Because we notice also some people, if you stay on the Zoom, some people may not feel as part of the discussion or may just feel like we just meet on Zoom. So we're trying to do a little bit of both. So that way people have an option to come in person, or if they're unable to have the Zoom option. So we're working on our recruiting efforts for the CAB, and we're starting to do more presentations. I know the next CAB meeting, we are inviting the Energy Trust of Oregon to talk about some of the rebates they have and the things that they can do for people in terms of, you know, like the county's got that weatherization program, but golly, you'll be on that list for 2-3 years before you even hear anything, if you do. I know that because we're on that list and still haven't heard anything. And we're actually going to have the county's weatherization department come too to speak with us. What we're trying to do is put the two together so that whatever the county can't handle, or instead of having this backlog, they can refer some of the individuals to ETO, who then can handle some of that backlog, and people don't have to be on a wait list for years. So that was in a nutshell what we discussed for the CAB meeting, and again, just going over our bylaws and seeing anywhere that we can make adjustments. The other one with Wes, we just went over really their SDCs. They are looking to they really are presenting the option to increase it, keep it around the same, or reduce it to the Board of County Commissioners. And out of that meeting, I realized how low our SDCs were in those areas. Wastewater and stormwater are pretty low. It's like $1,100. We're probably one of the lowest in the region. But something that came out of that I thought was enticing as well to look at, and I know this was brought up before, because I remember when former Mayor Gamba was on council, this was a topic, and it was West has a tiered SDC system. So,
Which Angel Falconer in particular proposed to them.
Yeah.
She was the big advocate for that. They wouldn't have had that without her.
so it'd be great if that was something that we did,
Well,
because.
we did do that. I don't know if we did it with water, didn't we?
No, we didn't tier it. We increased it. I don't think we tiered our SDCs. Like their SDCs, like for the smallest development, like an ADU, they pay 60% of the SDC. And then all the way up to the largest.
Oh, that didn't do it.
Yeah, because I thought that was a topic we were gonna look into, but I don't know if we ever actually did that. And based on what their review was, it just showed a flat rate of $1,141 or somewhere around that. So if we don't already do that, it'd be great to do that, or at the very least increase the SDCs as well, because they are pretty significantly low compared to other jurisdictions. The other thing.
You're asking, I just am noting the fact that you're always concerned that our costs are too high, and you're suggesting we need to raise them.
Well, yeah, developers, I don't care for very much because they're typically millionaires.
Yeah.
But the public, the residents, of course,
Yeah.
you know, I don't have $1,100 to throw around. I don't even have $1,700 to pay a portion of my property taxes right now. I don't think a lot of people do. So when
And
it comes to the developers, it makes sense.
You started the conversation saying, usually when an entity brings up SDCs, it's because they feel like they need to raise them, but you said
They are.
Wes is looking at raising or lowering?
Well, not lowering. They gave us the 3 options though, and said, this is what, because somebody asked about the effects on the ratepayers. Like, what does raising it do to the ratepayers? What is it keeping it around the same do? What is potentially lowering it do? So they gave us all 3 scenarios, and then they took feedback from us to take to the Board of County Commissioners. majority of people were on the side of having it in the middle option, or potentially raising it to the maximum. I did advocate for the maximum, and the reason was because if they were to do the maximum SDC, it would actually result in potentially $2 decrease for the ratepayers. If they kept it the same, you're not gonna see much movement, but if they lowered it, you'd see a increase on the ratepayers. So myself and Mayor McGriff from Morgan City share the same opinion that right now, developers are kind of have jurisdictions over a barrel. And maximizing the SDCs would actually benefit ratepayers in the long run. And not only that, but by increasing the SDCs to the maximum, that'll hopefully get cities or ignite cities to want to create and get creative on incentives to lower that SDC for developers if they build affordably. So that was kind of my message for Wes to take to the county commission. And yeah, we'll see what the commission decides to do on that one. In a nutshell, those are the meetings.
And I can circulate our SDC rates. I'm chatting.
Is it
with-
tiered right now?
It's a mixed bag. So we've got,
Tiered
you
in
know,
water.
wastewater is tiered by size of the unit. In water, it's tiered by meter size. In others, it's a single charge. So,
Yeah, they tiered on size of the development.
Yeah, I'm looking at the fee schedule
mhm.
and it's tiered. Because I thought we just picked the same size tiers that they had.
I know that,
Um,
when did we do that? Theirs just seems so much more cleaner, I guess.
Wastewater is the same for a single family. There's a lower one for duplex. Yeah, it's only water. And that may be about where we are in our master plans, because I think we adopt the new SCCs when they finish a new plan, and we did water a couple of years ago.
Yeah. I
So we
remember that.
adopted that then, and I don't know if are we in a wastewater plan phase now?
Storm, yes, I don't believe waste.
Okay.
I'll follow up
Go
with
ahead.
some more SDC information.
So no more on audit committee stuff, but I do have a report on the Watershed Council. They're trying to baseline the population of microinvertebrates, doing all the work with schools and that kind of thing, trying to have a before and after, when all the work is done, see what happens when this occurs. There's all sorts of tolerant and intolerant little bugs and that kind of thing. And so I asked the question, I said, well, this is good, we'll see a difference before and after, but how do you know that that's really good? And they said, they gave us some interesting information. They said there's sort of an ideal watershed very near here. It's called Balch Creek in Forest Park, which kind of has some of the similar sort of situations, but it's kind of in a environmentally, much more pure state that they can compare, their before and after, samples to see what they've really done and whether it's healthy or not. Even if you improve it, if you really made it healthy or not. And so there's a good, measuring stick over in Forest Park. They're making some progress on identifying a financial system provider. And, they're finally getting into the 21st century. They can now make ACH payments, and they actually have a line of credit. I've never had that before. They finished phase 2 of the design contract, and the full design packet has to be completed here by June to support the submission to the Highways Department for the big grant. And they have the results of the sediment testing. And, we kind of planned for it, budgeted for the worst case scenario, and we got it.
Oh, really?
We're gonna have to move every bit of it, okay?
Yeah.
But they said this, we knew that all along, okay? And so that's going to be 250,000 cubic feet of sediment removed, but that was built into the plan. The sediment was composed mainly of PFAS. It's everywhere. Ammonia, not sure where that came from, and hydrocarbons, not surprisingly.
Ammonia comes from agriculture. I mean, that's what I
It may
always
be
heard.
fertilizer.
There was a lot of
Fertilizer.
agriculture runoff.
Yeah.
Dang, that's crazy.
So 250,000 cubic feet.
Oh, man. Well, you said they knew it all along, but I will say, years ago, there was some hope it wasn't gonna be that bad.
Hope is not a plan.
Yeah. Well, there was some testing that was showing it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that much different than the main stem of the Willamette, but it obviously must be.
Well, they just had much more of a flow in the Willamette Creek. It's just stagnant, builds up, and that kind of thing. It doesn't get washed out like it does in the Willamette.
Well, while you're talking on that, I'll note that I think I sent everybody the link to the KGW coverage last week. There was also a meeting. I joined Neil when he wants to tour new officials around, and he's hoping to get Craig Roberts out there sometime soon. But we toured with Janelle Bynum's local staff office person who's a friend of yours.
Oliver?
Oliver,
Yeah.
yeah, last week. So that was great. He seemed pretty excited about it, and hopefully whenever Congress has a break to come home, we'll get Janelle there herself. Yeah. And Joseph is going to talk about that as part of the legislative?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay. Other council reports?
You want, I forgot, did you have one? Sorry.
Oh, just a little brief one. I went to the downtown, used to be Business Alliance, but now
It's
the
DAM, right?
Went to that
Downtown
damn
Alliance.
meeting. They're having some conversations about downtown beautification. They were discussing hanging baskets, possibly ground level baskets if that's not feasible. And, just kind of creating more of a lighted presence downtown. So I thought it was an interesting meeting, and it's nice to see that both the business of Milwaukie and the dam are continuing their advocacy around businesses in the city.
That's cool.
You sounded like you had some.
It was funny, I just forgot that Mayor McGriff mentioned about the SDCs and what they do in Oregon City. She mentioned that developers bond them out, so like the city won't collect on them until in some cases, the city won't collect on them until the development receives its certificate of occupancy. And it's actually helped some developers in finishing their projects and doing all that, and it's.
Oh, really? Did
Yeah.
she say it?
She did, she said it was a good thing, and she's like, we don't have a lot of money either, but we know we're gonna get that money, we just don't get it until they get there. And it tends to help. So on the flip side, as much as I wanna charge them the max, well, maybe we could also look at maybe not
Well, it's
collecting
interesting
until-
that this has been a big conversation at Metro Mayor's Consortium, and it's a thing that Mark Gamba actually has a bill on, right? To require cities to wait till the certificate of occupancy, but for the state to create a pool of money in case, because I think everybody's worst case scenario is an apartment building or some kind of housing builds and then doesn't pay it, and the city's left stuck with it. So that's what
That has
Mark,
happened on occasion.
Yeah, Greg DiLoretto brought that up, but Mayor McGriff had mentioned that they've never had an issue at this point.
what's interesting that she said that they found it useful because most of the mayors who have tried it have not. Gresham has had no one take them up on it.
Interesting. Huh.
Wilsonville has had maybe one or two, but really it's not been something their developers particularly wanted. So that conversation has happened a few times now at Oregon mayors and at Metro mayors. And I felt like it was a problem in search of a solution, or a solution in search of a problem, because the cities that have been trying it have not had many people use it, but if she's saying it's, that they're finding it useful in Oregon City, that's
Yeah.
good to know. But yeah, Gresham was like, we've had that for like 5 years and no one wants it.
Well, the argument being is that the developers could garner interest on that income in the period, from would have been the initial payment period to the date of occupancy period.
Yeah.
But I don't think, developers settle a lot of cash. I think they bring it in when they need it. And so I'm not sure that there's really money that they can utilize, during that period. So that may be one of the reasons it's not attractive.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know if you offer it, if they could sit on that money, or if they don't have the cost of using that money for additional year or whatever time it takes them to build, does that reflect in the lower price? Or lower rent,
It's a good question.
If they're saving money by not having to pay it until later, they're saving, does that benefit the renter? But
Yeah,
anyway,
I plan on reaching out to Mayor McGrissom more just to pick her brain on that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So it really got me curious.
Is that a bill you think has legs?
I think it depends on what money ask Rep. Gamble wants to make at the end of the day. I think we have had some good revenue forecasts, continue to have good revenue forecasts time and time again. So we've got a little more money to play with the state legislature. But I think it's where you lean in on your political capital. And I think he has some really exciting transmission work, but that might cost some money. He's got some other bills that are really exciting, but those might cost some money. So I think it's where you turn to. I know the governor, at least in talking with Representative Gamba, has shown interest in SDC deferral as a concept. And so if this gets incorporated into some of her priorities, maybe. Yeah.
Good to know. All right. Did you have any?
I've got a quick one. Are you going to talk about SHS a little bit in your council report?
I wasn't planning on it. I
Okay.
guess I've given you all my SHS offload as a written council report, but
That's
go
fair.
ahead, we can talk about it.
Okay, well, I don't have to double down too much on what Mayor Beatty's already sent out, but we heard in C4 some alarm bells from the county about the SHS bond in May. A lot of times when Metro has come and talked about the bond, they've said we've seen an influx in cash, we can lower the rate because we've had higher than expected returns, but I see you shaking your head.
I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, not the
You
case.
don't think what?
I don't think that's the case. I don't think the influx is a viable funding stream ongoing. I think it was just that. It was an influx because of the start of the program, but it's not a funding stream to rely on. And then to double down on that, the investments that counties have made with that overage is at a really perilous point because that's not an ongoing funding stream. So they've made these investments, and if Metro wants to propose a cut to the funding, it's a cut to the base funding, not the overage. So you're gonna see a service loss in both of those bonds. I'm sorry to steal
Nope,
your.
that is exactly, you've got good county talking points right there. That's exactly what Clackamas County said. And so the reason they think there was this influx is when you first implemented the payroll tax, some folks didn't quite understand how to implement it. So you had some delayed payments that were made. You saw this large influx as those delayed payments came in. A lot of counties budgeted assuming they had a lot more money to spend, but then they realized that that was a blip and now they need to maybe pare back. And considering now, like you're saying, Metro is considering paring back even more from the baseline, it's concerning a lot of local governments. And so a lot of conversations happening now about what the state of this May bond is going to be. I don't know, since we last met at the start of January, I don't know where that has gone, but it's something that I'm tracking. So you might know better than I do.
Well, I was gonna say, I don't think we know yet if
Yeah.
Metro's gonna vote to go in May or not. There's a lot of pressure on them to not go in May and to do more work on this. I think all the counties are unified in that.
Yeah.
Mayors are generally unified in that. but I don't know. I don't know what their,
And Counselor Lewis was not at this C4 meeting, and I haven't had a chance to talk with her after this, so I'd be curious to see.
I think she's been one of the advocates for going sooner rather than not putting it off.
Yeah.
But there's definitely been a lot of voices at the table. I did notice, I don't know if you guys are on the mail list, or it might go into your Modcast screening thing, but there's the Clackamas County Business Alliance is having a meeting on the SHS in the next couple of weeks. I just saw it in my email this week. I did attend a meeting that Mayor Buck alerted me to, a Zoom meeting that was kind of with Washington. It ended up feeling like, oh, we're interlopers in Washington County's meeting. It was mostly Washington County cities and Washington County business groups. Very much a lot of pushback there. And it was with the guy from the Portland Business Alliance that's been part of the stakeholder table at Metro through the last year. What's his name? Dr.
Andrew?
John Isaac. Yeah. And I think he was a little taken aback. He did not recognize the emotion behind the call for slowing down. But that was definitely the mood in that room and most of the conversations I've been part of. So, I don't know really know where
And maybe it's I don't know, if we can follow up with Counselor Lewis, but maybe we write a letter as a city or something to express how we've seen these funds being used to good effect and talk a little bit about our position. If that's something y'all would want to explore, I could draft a letter and send it to Scott or.
well, that'd be the right method, I
Yeah.
guess, yeah.
But if that's not something we want to explore.
I think it's a challenge because what Metro is proposing is that the sunset be extended.
Yeah.
And that is a long-term benefit to our region because
Yeah.
then we have sustained funding to be able to pay for core services. The problem is the calculation of cost.
Yeah.
So you have this funding pool that's coming in, you want to extend that to be able to make it, a more reliable funding stream. I think that the conversation about indexing is still on the table. So indexing would mean that if you as an individual are moving in or out of that high wage earner population, that you would either be taxed or not be taxed. And that's a simplified explanation of indexing, but it's essentially that, which makes it a tax that follows the economic trends of individuals, which, is, it's not a regressive, tax situation. So I think it's this double-edged sword,
Yeah.
right? Because we do want to be able to have a sustainable funding stream regionally, but the conversation about the allocation of funding is at a point where it's putting at odds building affordable housing and providing the services
Yeah.
to support the people who might be living in that very housing,
Yeah.
those very homes. So I think we'd have to thread the needle with a letter, not necessarily saying, don't do the bond, or, maybe not even like, don't do it in May, but rather, look specifically at the funding allocation and make sure that there are not devastating cuts to local services at the cost of being able to put more affordable homes in the region. And
Yeah.
it is, kind of a chicken and egg.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the discussions I've heard, everybody sees the need to extend the time. The questions have been that about, what's the right level to go to the counties, and should the counties pare back to allow more to go into a fund for building new housing. But also that there's a lot of, there's an audit, so Metro did an audit of the system, of the whole SHS measure, and there's a bunch of things called for in that audit that could improve reporting and accountability and having all the data be more consistent and stuff. And so there are some people who feel like, okay, let's look at 2026 or 2027 to go to the voters, and let's try to fix some of this stuff called out by this audit first.
Yeah.
You know, so I agree with Councilor Stavender that it is a needle to thread, and I'm not sure we want to send a letter at this juncture, but was C4 proposing to somehow send a letter and
A
I mean,
lot
the
of the
county has
county
been-
folks were
county has done
trying to
that.
do a call to action, and I think it would be, like y'all are saying, not attacking an extension or specific elements that they're really trying to do to improve the way that the SHS program was structured. It more is that delay in time, a look at the cost and the cutbacks that they're doing. And so if we wanted to do a letter, I think it would be more narrowly tailored to saying, this is a conversation better had in a year or so with a better fiscal picture of the program. But if folks don't want a letter, I think that's fine too.
I feel like we have representation at the right tables. You know, Clackamas County
Yeah.
has representation at the right tables. We as a city have the mayor in the right rooms to have a conversation. And the cities that are represented at that core convening table, I mean, Lake Oswego is there. Mayor Buck is really entrenched in this information and knows, I think that he can be really nuanced in his advocacy, and a letter seems like a blunt tool for the situation.
That's really fair.
But thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, I
I'm
didn't
glad,
mean to,
it's interesting to
I'm
me
happy to-
that the
yeah.
C4 is, I mean, the county is using C4 to advocate for
Yeah.
that, so that's interesting.
The one other thing I have is about the governor's housing bill. We can wait until legislative updates if we'd like. I'll defer to you.
Well, we have like 7 minutes if you want to give, I mean, yeah.
Okay, governor has dropped a really interesting housing bill, House Bill 2138, if you want to look it up on the list. The bill does a few things. Most broadly, it applies House Bill 2019, the townhome and duplex and quadplex requirements to urban unincorporated areas, not just cities. And so that extension would apply to large swaths of Clackamas County. Yep, so it's not just us. That's part one, the largest part. There are a few other tweaks that I think will be interesting for us. One is it has some affordable housing provisions that kind of mirror some of the work that we've discussed in our affordable housing code. And so tracking that and seeing how ours might align, might like be more additive. Her housing provision, I will say, is at the 120% AMI. And so what we can think about is, if the governor is doing that work at the 120% AMI, is there something that we could do that's more narrowly tailored for those lower AMIs? So I think that's one thing to think about. And it's also thinking about, okay, if the governor is already giving this extension, what creative things could we do? So that's second part. Third part is about SROs, single room occupancy. Right now, SROs have to be counted as at the same unit density as a normal unit. And so when we set a unit density of 4 units per dwelling, these SROs, even though they have shared facilities, are being counted as if they were all independent units. It kind of defeats the purpose of an SRO. So the governor's bill would say SROs count as a third of a unit. You could have 3 SROs per normal unit. So it kind of accounts for that new unique SRO building type. Last, there are 2 provisions in addition to this. One is no rollbacks of existing density requirements. So basically, if your city sets a certain standard for height requirements, lot sizes, unit limits, all of these different provisions, you can't go backwards. You can only go forwards. I don't know how this would apply to zone types, and this is a question I've asked the legislative office for research, but if we were to upzone an area into RHD, it would effectively raise certain caps. We wouldn't have to change the requirements in RHD if we were to rezone it as RMD. And so I'm trying to clarify if that type of change would still be allowable under the governor's bill. I think my reading of the bill is the requirements that we have in RMD or RHD are the lowest they can go. We can go higher from here, but we can't go backwards. But you can still rezone as you'd like throughout the city. That's one provision. Last provision is around rulemaking. I call this out for you, Councilor Koster-Brody. There's a provision requiring that DLCD looks at design standards for manufactured housing and seeing if there's ways that you can change or like rulemaking that needs to be done to make it easier for manufactured housing and prefabricated housing to be made across cities. I don't know if that is exactly 3D housing, but it's of that same type or unconventional building methods that we can use in cities, and are there design standards that limit that in certain cities? So typical co-tech fashion, it's a lot of housing tweaks to try and make it more standard across the state how you build housing.
Well, that last one, I'm curious to read that one because it's always been my understanding that cities can't treat manufactured housing more strictly than stick-built housing.
So the interesting thing, the way it's worded is, are there design standards that like implicitly like unfairly burden manufactured homes? So if you have a certain window requirement that the typical manufactured home wouldn't comply with, do you have to tweak that in some way? Or is there rulemaking to account for that? So it's looking at those facially neutral design standards that might, as applied, impact manufactured homes. Yeah. This is the bill as introduced, so it will be definitely changing. But I think this is, of all the housing bills, this is one to really look at. It's not her funding bill, it's all policy. There will be a funding bill as well, but I'll keep us posted on changes that happen to it. It's certainly nice to hear our little neighbors to the east and south will be doing a little more upzoning as well.
Yes, yes. Well, that was, I mean, I thought that was where they were going when Rep now, Congresswoman, what's her name?
Salinas?
No, who's our new?
Bynum.
No,
Hoyle?
the one from.
Oh, Dexter.
Dexter.
Yeah.
Dexter.
Okay,
When Rep Dexter,
let's name the whole delegation.
when she led a working group on the urban unincorporated areas like
Okay.
summer before last.
Yeah.
And so I was hoping they were, I mean, that seemed to be where that was headed, and so I'm really glad that they're,
It answered your prayers.
yeah,
Oh.
yeah. Okay, all right, well, now we have used our time, so, thanks everyone for your council report. We'll be back in half an hour. We are adjourned.